Toronto is one of only 2 cities in Canada that has a nonprofit, charitable, artist-run animation center. So we've been in operation since 1984, and primarily we function to provide affordable and accessible animation studio space to artists of all levels of experience. If you're just starting out or whether you have had many years of experience, maybe working in the industry, we support independent animation production in our studios, VR, 3D, and classical hand-drawn and stop motion. So if you haven't heard about us before, look us up. Toronto Animated Image Society. We do screenings, we do workshops. It's a total blast, and we're located in the northwest corner of the downtown. I want to thank our many wonderful sponsors and partners that have made this event possible. First, I want to thank our hosts, OCAD University, the Digital Painting and Expanded Animation Program, as well as the Digital Futures Program. So thank you to OCAD. And our other primary sponsor is the Hand-Eye Society. And if you don't know about the Hand-Eye Society, it's a Toronto not-for-profit dedicated to supporting and showcasing video games made primarily as a form of creative expression. So they're a wonderful partner for us to be here with tonight. We've also had the support of Seneca College Animation Program, so thank you to both Hand-Eye and to Seneca. And also from TAFI, which is the Toronto Animation Arts Festival International, and Lefort Talent Group. And TASTE, we also wish to acknowledge and thank the support of the Canada Council for the Arts and the Ontario Arts Council that support our operations and our programming. And a huge thanks to all the volunteers. We've had a huge volunteer team here tonight working together, so a round of applause for our volunteers. All right, now the main event. So this isn't often that we get to have an opportunity at TASTE to be working with video game artists, particularly those where a video game has been hand-drawn. And you're going to hear all about that tonight from our guest artist. And I'm going to introduce them to you right now. So Tina Navraxi is a 2D animator and concept artist. Ali Morby is stop-motion backgrounds painting post-production artist. And Caitlin Russell, who unfortunately is not able to be here tonight, did the background art, and she's a painter. They're all the beautiful watercolor backgrounds. So these, we're going to hear presentations from all 3 artists on their contributions to Studio MDHR's game Cuphead. And we're going to begin with Tina. So I want to welcome Tina to the podium.
So hi, my name is Tina Navratsky, and I'm a 2D animator and concept artist for the game Cuphead by Studio MDHR. I joined the studio in 2015, and I was the 4th animator on the team. Towards the end of production, we had 1 more animator, so we were 5 animators in total. I animated the characters for Sugarland Shimmy with Baroness von Bonbon. I did all the concepts for those and animate them as well. I animated a lot of characters for the run and gun levels, and as well as some bosses for King Dice's casino fight. I animated over 60 characters for the game. If you really want to know which ones, they're right there. So you can see every single one of them, and you don't have to ask me for particulars. So I want to talk to you today about the creative process for the run and gun levels, and I'll be more particularly talking about Perilous Piers. This one is near and dear to my heart because I got to animate every single character for this level. I even got to do the visual effects for it, so those really annoying waves in the background, which are over 70 frames per wave, I got to animate those as well. So I love this level. The first thing I want to talk to you about is what makes Cuphead so eye-catching. The first thing everybody kind of fell in love with was that 1930s feel and look. And the way that Studio MDHR, reiterated a new version of a 1930s feel was their extreme attention to detail. They really wanted to be authentic to the period, so they insisted on having everything hand-drawn. And as you'll hear from my colleagues, Ali Morby and Caitlin Russell, we put a lot of time and effort into making the details really reflect what was happening in the era when it comes to technology and how the visuals were created. So here you have a lot of 1930s cartoons, which were of inspiration for animators. We did a lot of research. We watched work from Fleischer Brothers, from the early Disney studios, from iWorks, Comicolor cartoons, and even some crazy Russian cartoons that were happening at the time, just a little bit all over the world. We studied everything frame by frame just to make sure that we got that rubber hose feel and what made these cartoons so intriguing. So one of the things was to work traditionally. We actually animated everything on paper. Everything is hand-drawn at an animation desk. And here I am. My hair was blonde back then. I recently got it changed. So this is a hot dog from one of the carnival levels, and it's one of the mini bosses. And I'm working away. I don't work at this speed, per se. I am a fast animator, people tell me, but not this fast. This is, a time lapse. So we were keeping it traditional, everything on paper, which means a lot of paper and a lot of ink. Everything is also inked traditionally on paper by one amazing woman called Maya Moldenhauer, who's also a producer at Studio MDHR. And she single-handedly inked the work of every single animator by herself, which is ridiculous. Thank you, Maya. She's amazing. We all appreciate her, and she's an incredible, incredible person and amazing artist to work with. So this means a whole lot of paper. This here is just a pile of animations I have in my house currently. These are all the animations I did for Cuphead. They're beautifully stored in cardboard boxes with tape on them. But it kind of gives you a feel of how much work went into it throughout all these years working on the game. So although we worked with very traditional methods, the studio is actually very untraditional, and a lot of people are not aware that we weren't sitting side by side in one room creating this game. We were actually working all remotely. I am the only animator here in Toronto. We have one animator in Vancouver. We have 2 animators in San Francisco and 1 in LA. And the way that we all convene as a studio is over this server called Basecamp, which is basically a kind of like online server where you can give tasks and upload images and comments, and you can upload videos, and our art director and our game designer, Chad and Jared Moldenhauer, would give us tasks. Each one of us would get a bunch of feedback from here, and that's how we worked. So I'm going to talk about run and gun levels, and one thing that was pretty awesome about the 1930s cartoons was that they were supposed to be really short, funny cartoons that happened before a feature film. So after a while, they had to produce a lot of these cartoons, and they ran out of ideas, I guess, or they were, trying to find any theme that could make a new cartoon very silly and cute and quick. So the storylines weren't very in-depth. They didn't have a lot of character development. They were based on something fun and fanciful that the audience can appreciate in a short time. So any theme that you can think of, there's probably a 1930s cartoon made about it. So as you see up here, you have music and Halloween, candy, birds, bugs, Easter, and anything you can think of. So it's great references for us because that's how Studio MDHR approached the run and gun levels. First, they picked a central theme. So generally, when I would get an assignment for a run and gun level, the assignment would be from Chad or Jared, hey Tina, draw us anything and everything that lives in a harbor or near docks. And when I would get a task like this, I actually really like lists. So I would make a list, and I would write 10 or I would come up with maybe 10 or 15 ideas of what could live in a harbor or in a tree or whatever the task was. And I would usually get stuck just because I was exhausted. And I would call my sister, who is not an animator or an artist at all. I would Skype her. She's a PhD historian. She has nothing to do with the gaming world. She never plays games. And I would ask her, hey, what else could live near a harbor? And for some reason, her brain is so messed up, she would come up with 50 ideas. She was my secret weapon, and at some point she would also come up with a bunch of death ideas for a bunch of the characters. I would be like, hey, how could a domino die? And she's like, oh, it could kick itself in the face. And I'm like, yeah, awesome, thank you. I think she deserved a credit, to be honest. Anyway, so once I did that, I would focus in on I would have 50 ideas, which I couldn't draw all at once, so I'd focus in on the ones that I really enjoyed and liked, and I would start drawing. Next would come a barrage of concepts. So these are just a bunch of concepts for Perilous Piers. I didn't put all of them up here because it would be way too much. So here you have a can of worms, octopuses. Also, what's great about the 1930s, not only humans and animals could become characters, any object, you slap some eyeballs on it and it could come to life. It's fine. So one of the things that I realized when I was watching 1930s cartoons was that a lot of the characters were male. Only the love interests were female, it seems. Everything else in the world was all a man. And I realized that, oh, that kind of sucks. So I started making sure that I add in some cute female characters as I concept, just to make sure that, Chad and Jared had something fun to choose from. Oh, these guys I really like. They're like 1980s workout poles. But they didn't make it, sadly. Here, when I was talking about female characters, here I have a husband and wife, a mop and bucket. They don't look very happy. And the bench looks like it's going to eat you. But, that's part of a charm. It's supposed to be slightly creepy. So after I kept drawing and drawing and drawing, Chad would just yell, "Stop, okay, we have enough." No, he would never yell. He's super calm. He would just go like, "All right, I think we have enough concepts now. You can stop drawing." And I'd be like, "All right." So I would jump on another task, and they would process all these concepts. And a lot of the time, this is when they would clarify to themselves, what is the level going to be like? What are the enemies? What are the enemies going to be doing? And then I would get more specific requests. So it would be kind of honing in on an idea. Like right here, they were like, we need a little enemy, like a barnacle or something squishy that throws out spiky things. So I would start drawing a lot of barnacles. And you see I have a couple of girl barnacles in here too, but the really grumpy one at the bottom right, second to last, got chosen. And then they liked my starfish that I drew previously, but they were going to be really small on screen. So they said, we like the starfish idea, but can you make some more simpler designs? So we're going to be tiny, so they need to be legible when they're really small. So I would draw a bunch of starfish. Mini bosses, sorry, my throat is getting dry. Mini bosses were very similar in the sense that it was more of a specific request. Generally, Chad would give me this beautiful, beautiful concept sketch. It was super detailed, very well thought out. He's such a talented person. Anyway, so he would send me this, and he'd be like, okay, we need a lobster that's going to be, it could be a crab or a lobster. He wasn't sure at this point. It could be in the water, and this is his size in relationship to Cuphead, and we need some concepts for this. He added a fun little blurb at the very bottom. I don't know if you could read it, but he said it'd be fun if the crab or lobster could have some props or some kind of characteristics of a sea captain or a fisherman from the 1930s. So I researched a bunch of their clothing to see what they wore at the time. And I started by making some crab concepts. And you can see here, I added a little straw hat, a little pipe, some beards and things, just little accessories that make him look like a fisherman or a captain. And then I did some lobsters. I was kind of more excited for the lobsters, so I had more fun with these ones. And I drew a whole bunch of them with different facial expressions and little accessories as well, different proportions, just so he had a variety of things to choose from. Then Chad would pick his favorite. Chad's the art director and creative director on Cuphead. He would pick his favorite, but then he would bombard me with a bunch of concepts just to solidify the design and make it, more meaty and the way that he had envisioned it. So here, a bunch of his comments were, make his claws bigger, make his head smaller. We want those little hairs that I had some other concepts. Please put them back onto this lobster. And they also didn't like that he was floating on top of the water, whereas other concepts, he was kind of standing upright. So they wanted him to be standing upright again. I would take all this information and I would start doing keys. And we would go through several iterations. Supposedly the one on the top left looks drunk. He's a sea captain. I assumed that rum was plentiful, but anyway, so too drunk for that one. The one on the top right, supposedly the eyebrows were a little bit too high off his face. He didn't like that, and the mouth was not exactly 1930s. He found it too modern. And the one at the bottom middle was the winner, the really angry one with the little round mouth. So this was just a key to solidify the design. I didn't use it in the animations. It was, just there to figure out what his character design was like. And now animation is my favorite bit. So I would actually record reference videos for these animations. I did record one for the lobster. They're very embarrassing, so I'm happy to share them with you. The lobster one I couldn't find, sadly. I have no idea where it is. But this is a reference video for Baroness von Bonbon shooting her gun. I animated that one. So I had an umbrella somewhere, and I would shoot this umbrella around my living room and record reference footage. I'm really into it. So the reason why I would record reference footage was to really get a feel for the movement in my own body. I find that helps me animate. But also, when you look through video of real life, you'll notice little details and fun things that happened that you wouldn't have noticed if you had gone straight to sketching. So reference videos are very helpful, for the big characters anyway. The next thing I would do is thumbnails. So I would do tiny little pencil drawings of stick figures, as you can see up there, for the Captain Lobster swimming animation. He had to do a back crawl, so I thought that was kind of weird. And I did a bunch of thumbnails, no details, just figuring out the poses that would be the keys. After that, I would do a second iteration of thumbnails with the character kind of more fleshed out, which I couldn't find again, I'm sorry. So here is the first pose test. It's very rough. I animate with Col-Erase blue pencil. So it's very light on the page, therefore I had to scan it quite a bit darker so that Chad and Jared could see it. And the reason why I would send this super rough animation to them right away is because in case that I didn't understand what they wanted or the movement is too fast or too slow for the gameplay, I could fix it really quickly. We could just, extend some frames, reduce some frames, make any changes now when, it took me no time at all to make these frames, instead of waiting till it's super detailed, sending it to them then, and then I have to start from scratch. So there was my post test. It's around 6 frames with some breakdowns. That got approved, thankfully, and I would add all the in-betweens. So Cuphead is animated on ones, which means every single frame that you see is a drawing. There's 2 reasons for this. One of it in the 1930s, before they figured out they could animate on 2s, which is 2 drawings, 1 drawing per 2 frames, which makes life a lot easier. You only have to draw 12 drawings for 24 frames a second instead of 24. The reason we animate on ones is it's true to the very beginning of the 1930s cartoons. They were animating everything on ones, which makes it kind of loosey-goosey, and that's kind of part of the appeal. But also, in a video game, you're moving the character by code. And if it's on 2s, it would start flashing. It would be really jarring to the eye, so we had to animate everything on ones. That's another reason why there's so many drawings for Cuphead. So this got approved. Chad and Jared were happy with it. And then I get to animate some fun secondary action, so I added his hat, his beard, those little hair things on top of his little hat, and I would send it again because I'm paranoid, and I would send it again to Chad and Jared to approve, and they were okay with it. So then I add all these details. This is still with Col-Erase blue. I wouldn't add pencil to the very, very end. So this is roughed in details, my phase 3. And then finally, I would tie it down with HB pencil, and I was very meticulous with my tie downs for 2 reasons. One, you don't want your cleanup artist to be not aware which line you wanted them to tie down, so then your animation would jiggle, and you didn't want it to do that. So, that way I knew my drawings would be well represented. And 2, poor Maya had to ink the entire game herself. Let's make her life as easy as we possibly can. So I would be really, really tight with my tie downs. Generally, this would be the end. I would just scan these it's a brother scanner where you just feed the pages, drink a coffee, and it scans everything for you. And I would upload it to Basecamp for Maya to ink. However, some characters would have a pass of visual effects, so VFX on top of them. For Captain Lobster, I thought it would be really cool if he had some splashes of water as he's swimming backwards. So I made a really rough concept here of what this water can look like. Chad thought that was great. So I made a second rough. I know it's kind of light to see because it's with Col-Erase blue, but he has water dragging in rough off his claws. And then finally, I would tie down the water so the visual effect would be with the animation. This was done on a separate sheet of paper because you wanted the inker and the color artist to, ink them separately and add maybe an effect or a transparency, something like that. You wanted the 2 drawings to be separate. So here it is in action. Here's Captain Lobster. Look at him go. Not a lot of people like him, seemingly. But I like him. Lots of love. So I'm almost done. I just wanted, for the students out there or people who want to try 2D animation or 1930s animation, I want to recommend some great reference books that I used throughout this production. Obviously, Richard Williams' The Animator's Survival Kit. Everybody should know this book. It is a survival kit. That's what it's there for. If you're into visual effects and want to try, fire, water, all that kind of stuff, Elemental Magic 1 and 2 by Joseph Gilland are must-haves. They're great. They explain the energies behind the visual effects and not the styles, so you can put any style you want on top of his theories. Finally, there's Illusion of Life by Disney animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. It's a great big brick of a book, and the pictures are really pretty, but I really recommend that you read it cover to cover because the text is really amazing. Finally, I really consider that model drawing helps animators a lot, drawing from life, cafe sketching. There's movement and form by one of my 2D animators teachers, Samantha Youssef. She's incredible. She draws not only on her experience being a 2D animator for Disney, but she's also a ballet dancer. So her understanding of how energies work in the human form comes from dance as well as animation. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. And then for 1930s references, The Hidden Art of Disney's Golden Age is a great book. It's a book about the concept art, kind of like what I showed you just now, the back, like the scenes, the things that the artists were drawing before they created the shorts. It's a great book, I recommend it. And then I did some just background research on the 1930s era. What was happening in the studios? What was the climate like? What were the conditions the animators were in? And so I read 2 biographies. One of them is Out of the Inkwell by Richard Fleischer, and he talks about Max Fleischer, the founder of the Fleischer Studios. It's a very kind of personal biography. He's his son, so he knew him as Dad, or Pops, as he called him. So it's a great, great book. And then The Hand Behind the Mouse about Ub Iwerks, who was Disney's right-hand man, who actually animated the first Mickey Mouse cartoons. He animated Plane Crazy in 2 weeks in a basement. So great books to read. And then finally, you get to see the slide again. Goodbye. So some shameless self-promotion. I'm Tina Navratsky. You can follow me at, I know you can't pronounce it, it's okay. It's at Navratsky Tina for Twitter. Instagram is Tina Navratsky Art. I have a blog, tinanavratsky.blogspot.ca. And if you want to learn more about Cuphead and Studio MDHR, please look them up. They have a website, studiomdhr.com. And you could follow them on Twitter for all the official Cuphead news at Studio MDHR. Thanks. So Caitlin Russell was really sad she couldn't be here, and she asked me if I could take on her presentation. I got this information a day ago. Therefore, please bear with me if I really suck. I'm going to try and do her art justice because it is amazing, but I might be reading a little bit more than normally I would be. So let me get organized. All right, so Caitlin Russell, she's a background painter for Cuphead, and she joined Studio MDHR through the OCAD job board. So she was an OCAD student, which she was trolling through a lot after graduating from the illustration program here. She was usually a figurative artist. She liked drawing characters and would paint those in watercolor, but Studio MDHR was looking for a background artist. So she did this little test drawing for them to show them what she can do, and she got the job, and it was a learning process from there. She got it going. So for Cuphead, she worked on all the boss backgrounds, all the run and gun levels, and the world maps. She basically painted everything. Everything that you see in watercolor. It was, again, a one-woman show, kind of like Maya. She's incredible. So the first thing that she did was research, kind of like the animators. She would research what they were doing in the 1930s for background paintings. They were mainly watercolor and painted on watercolor paper or illustration board. So the first thing she did was to do some paper tests to see what paper would best work for a video game that's scanned in digitally. So most watercolor papers have a grit to them. They have bumps, like the leaf that you see on the right-hand side is on a cold press watercolor paper. And when you scan that in, it creates a lot of visual noise. So it wasn't ideal for a video game that is already very busy visually. So she started trying out with cold press watercolor papers, and supposedly Arch's hot press was the winner. And it absorbed paint beautifully, could handle a bunch of layers, and still look great when scanned in. So you see the leaf on the left is on cold press, which is a lot cleaner and less busy. And up top, you have some 1930s background inspirations. All right, so 1930s backgrounds were really playful and rounded and warm. They used soft colors to keep the animation characters front and center. The paintings were very full and lush, and they only used white when they absolutely needed to. Like here, the clouds are white, everything else is painted in. So perspective at the time was kind of kept loose and fancy-free. They didn't really care too much that it was super realistic. They wanted to treat it more like a theater piece, where the character is most important, and the background has to kind of work with creating a focal point. Okay. They were using pools of light to lead the eye to really focus on where the action is. And here is from a reference book. Here's Cinderella's backgrounds. And you can really see on the right-hand side, the red highlights the pool of light, which is telegraphing Cinderella's movement. So when you see the frame, right away you know what she's going to interact with. It's going to be the bed, or she's going to go down the stairs or up the stairs. So it was very nice and worked really well with video games. So here you can see how she's using this kind of lighting style, spotlighting the main area and using light to lead the eye. The style of lighting translated super well into game backgrounds where many of the same principles come into play. So in 2D platforming gameplay, the platforms are highlighted to show where the character can go, what he can jump on, and what he can interact with. So here are some examples from various games with Demon Front, Rayman, Ori and the Blind Forest, and one of Caitlin's favorites, Donkey Kong Country, which she used to play a lot. So it was one of her main key references. She loved that game. So here we have, a reiteration again. When it comes to boss battles, it was very simple to figure out the lighting. You just had a kind of spotlight in the main stage where Cuphead is going to be, and it's very straightforward. It's just one image. Where it comes to run and gun levels, it got more complicated. A lot of it was very chaotic. It was important to be able to quickly discern what the platforms are. And so for the prototype version of what would later become Forest Follies, you could see on the left, this is a demo for PAX that she painted. The whole background kind of mushes together. You're not quite sure what is interactable and not. It looks beautiful, but the one on the right is the final version of Forest Follies where the platforms are almost glowing, and it really helps the player know, okay, I can jump there, this is interactable. So it was a learning process. So now she was going to take you through an entire background and how the creative process was from beginning to end. So first you would get another amazing sketch from our art director, such talent, which is on the top left, and he wanted a background for Botanic Panic, where you fight a giant potato, onion, and carrot, and it was supposed to be in a little vegetable garden. So the first thing she would do was initial rough, which you could see on the top right. She would get some feedback back from Chad. One of the things he said is he wanted to open up the gameplay a little bit, have more room where Cuphead could run, and put the Acme Grow in the background so that the foreground is less heavy and busy. And then there's a final kind of rough color before she got started. So now we're going to talk a little bit about multiplaning. This is a lovely video, courtesy of Walt Disney from back in the day, explaining how the Oxbury camera worked. So back then, they didn't have computers. The way that they created a feeling of depth in 2D games is they created multiple layers of a single background and put them on glass and then filmed it and moved the backgrounds at different speeds to create the illusion of a real 3D background, which is called multiplaning. So she would do the same thing with her paintings. This is a slide, unfortunately, she didn't manage to do before she had to leave. So she would cut up the background for Botanic Panic into different levels. So foreground, middle ground, background, sky, etc. Kind of like here we have with a beautiful Oxbury camera, which I actually got to shoot on. It's a pain. It's awful. It was actually traumatic. So let's be happy for computers. Yay, computers. So this is what the background looks pieced back together. So all of this was painted separately on different layers. She would cut out the white digitally and then put it back together. And there it is. And then you finally see it in action
Here's a
here.
real high-class bout. You're up.
Great. I think we all know the potato. So boss battles were pretty straightforward, as she says. It's just one background. It's still a lot of work, but it's straightforward. So the run and gun levels were the ones that were more complicated. They were like a jigsaw puzzle to create, fitting them together with lots of looping assets and layers. So she went through a lot of planning before any painting started, because kind of like with animation, it's easy to reiterate on sketches, but if you make a watercolor painting, it takes a long time. You don't want to have to scrap it at the end. So here are some of the run and gun levels that she worked on. And she found that through trial and error, she figured out the best process was to storyboard out the level first and designing the key moments. So for Treetop Troubles, you start in at the bottom of a log, you move across, and then you go up, and then you go on a diagonal, etc. Here's the first iteration on the storyboard. As you can see, at first there was supposed to be a squirrel village in the middle somewhere, but that got scrapped, unfortunately. So here you have the final storyboard for what the background was going to be. You enter the tree, you go diagonally first, and then you go up, and then you go across these little leaves to the final platform. If anybody has tried this level, I'm sure you've enjoyed this background multiple times. I know I have. So after she did the storyboard, she would actually lay it out and do the in-betweens, kind of just, mapping out the entire thing. So this is the amazing map for the Treetop Troubles level. And then finally, she would start, again, piecing it, putting little pieces that could loop. The platforms are all separate, and you have a nice image of, the backgrounds versus the platforms that you can interact with, and little, background elements or foreground elements. And she would piece it back together, and here it is, in one shot, the entire Treetop Troubles level, which is pretty damn impressive, if, yeah. So much pain and agony for all involved. So similarly, for Perilous Piers, which is what I just talked about, she did a similar approach, starting with a storyboard and then filling in the details. So here you have, all those elements where, Cuphead runs along some platforms, and then there's rickety staircases, and so on. So for references for this section, she tried to look at a lot of archival photos and old postcards to see what harbors looked like in the 1930s. She also tried to look back what the artists of the 1930s would have had for inspiration, so she looked at classical paintings as well. Let's see, yes. So the other thing that was really interesting is that the two studios, one of them, Fleischer Brothers, was in New York, whereas Disney Studios were in LA. So if you look at their two styles of cartoons, you'll see cities represented in a very different way. In the Fleischer Studios, the cities are always grubby and kind of like misty and dirty, which is very New York of the time, whereas the LA studio would have this like glitzy kind of glamour approach to their city backgrounds. So she really liked this image that she saw of a harbor with New York in the back in the 30s with this kind of hazy mist over it, and she added that into her background. So for, hold on, let me find my notes. Okay, so for rickety platforms, she went a little deeper for different references. You could see there's Metal Slug on the top left, which is given to her by the art director Chad as a reference. And a surprisingly useful reference, and she told me about the story, I think it's pretty awesome, is the top right was a hippie village, which was called Taylor Camp because Elizabeth Taylor's brother bailed the hippies out when they were arrested for vagrancy and set them up on his property. There's a lot of amazing naked pictures of people just like running around this hippie camp. It's pretty great. And the architecture is amazing, so it was very inspirational for Caitlin. And unfortunately, it lasted for 10 years and then got burned to the ground. So poor hippies. So when she started sketching Perilous Piers, she would start with a very technical drawing. You could see up top, it kind of has no character to it. It's just figuring out the perspective where Cuphead could run. And once she had that solidified and approved by Chad, she would go over it and add those like cute, rounded, cartoony details that make it so fun. But you have to figure out the perspective first. And then she would get some random left field requests. This one is by Jared. So you can see Chad is the one in the family who's more artistically. I think this is done with MS Paint, a wonderful software. And you could see it has so much information. There's a little stick figure. It tells you the proportions she needs. So Jared would throw a curveball and say, hey, we need a boat that Cuphead could go into, and can we add it in? And the reference photo that you have over here is actually a boat from Caitlin's hometown. She lived near a harbor. So she took this photo and used it directly as a reference for the boat that she created. So the developers, as you can probably heard in the animation stories, they crammed in a lot of Easter eggs and a lot of nods to various things. And I don't know if you realize this, but the backgrounds have a ton of little Easter eggs and nods to other games or random famous people. So Chad and Jared requested that the boat be called the Lillian, for Lillian Friedman Astor, the first American female studio animator. She started out as an in-betweener at Fleischer Studios, but was secretly promoted to doing full animations, so a lot of her work is uncredited. She never appears in the credits. But she worked on a number of Betty Boop and Popeye cartoons. So yay, there she is, there's Lillian. Hi, Lillian. And she has a boat in Cuphead for all her hard work on those cartoons. So here's the Lillian finally painted. And again, cut out so that it could be implemented in-game. These are some other reference photos for that same Perilous Piers level, which were, again, from real life from her hometown, and she would add a lot of the kind of moody effects of the backgrounds of the skies using these reference photos. So finally, here you have the level kind of cut up in different parts. On the top, it's the background of the sky and the water. And then over top of it, you have all those platforms, the boat, and some foreground elements at the very bottom, which can all be randomized or moved so that the level works better. And she was going to talk to you a little bit more about the world maps, but unfortunately did not give me her notes. So we're going to have to end it on this beautiful, zoomed out view of what all the Cuphead Inkwell Isles look like. It was Caitlin Russell who did these beautiful, beautiful paintings. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Russell, or her website is katerussell.com. Thanks so much.
Hi. My name is, hello. My name is Ali Morby, and I've made all the models and props in Cuphead, and you're gonna have to bear with me. This is my first time public speaking, so. And so I would like to talk about, okay, so first of all, my background. I'm a woodworker and a designer and a fabricator, and I have a little shop in the Junction, and so most of what I make is like weird little one-off things, and that's where kind of my expertise came in handy for this game. And I made, and I worked on like this book in the beginning, the tutorials, the tower for the dragon, as well as the mummy, not the mummy, Jimmy the Great, his little pyramid kind of desert scene, and you can see those. I'm sure you guys have already kind of hovered around those. But yeah. So the first thing I want to talk about is this. Tina mentioned about the Oxbury camera and how it worked, and a multiplane camera, and Disney owned the patents on that machine and that system, and so the Fleischer brothers, on the other hand, they couldn't use it, so they had to figure out a different way to kind of move their characters to a scene, and they came up with this thing, which is pretty awesome, where they basically just made a physical model, and they had a piece of painted glass in front, and they would just kind of go through all the different frames and photograph them one by one, and then move the model over a little bit, and then photograph the next thing. And it was all done in one shot. There was no real compositing. It was all just kind of this really cool character walking through a really convincing 3D model. And they were usually painted to look, really to match the paintings for their backgrounds. So the first thing I want to talk about is this level, which you guys played a little bit, and this tower, which is right over there. And so this is like, at this point, let me go back. This is the, before I made this thing, the first thing I made for the game was the tutorial background, which is basically just a piece of paper which I just carefully lit, and there it is. And yeah. And you guys already know this is where you learn how to play the game and shoot and dodge and get stuck at dashing. And originally, Chad approached me to make this model for Grim Matchstick. This is another one of his awesome little, like he was heavy into the 3D visualization, and kind of how it was gonna get laid out, and he originally thought that, okay, maybe we can just make a 3D model and Caitlin can paint textures and we can just kind of map them on and make it look as close as possible. But then he also said, you know, well, maybe you guys can also just make it and we can photograph it. And I had never done anything like this before, so I said yes. And it was cool, like come on. And for all these things, for stuff like this, we just have to start with concepts, and we need to kind of draw from ideas that you know will give us put us in the right direction. And there's a whole bunch of castles here, a lot of different castles. Mostly you're looking at kind of German and French castles. There's Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria, and that was built it's actually fairly new. It's built in 1869. And that is what inspired Disney's Cinderella Castle, which is this one over here. I don't know if this is Disneyland or Disney World, but Neuschwanstein is what kind of inspired that look. And so we kind of drew from that, and you know, we picked our favorite ones and our favorite little traits, like these nice, really steep roofs, copper roofs, and the jettying, which is where you see this where stone kind of tapers out. It's got these little battlements almost, and something that looked magical is what we're kind of going for. And then Kate used those ideas to drop some sketches. And over here we've got some of the original like preliminary sketches, and obviously we went for the last one. And then also some ideas as far as how it will work in the level, how we're going to color it, and how it's going to get painted, and what kind of mood we're looking for. Now, originally, I was thinking about carving this thing out of wood, which was a really stupid idea, because I'm a woodworker. So, and that would have taken a really long time, and it would have been solid. It would be great. It would have lasted forever, but it would have taken a really long time. And if I messed up anything, it would have been kind of a disaster to fix. And a friend of mine who worked in props and model making and set design for TV and movies said, well, we use insulation foam for a lot of our stuff. And that's, you can see like kind of a cut block as that first photo. And this is stuff you use in your house. You can go buy it at Home Depot. It's cheap. It's really easy to work with. It cuts really easily. And it makes an awful sound when you cut it. It's like just a horrible sound. My roommates hated us because they're like trying to watch nature documentaries, and I'm sawing through this shit. Anyway, it gets carved, it gets primed and painted, and you end up with this guy. And next thing is to photograph it. And let's go back to that. And in the level, you guys have already seen it. You fight Grim, and as he flies around his tower. And so we needed a full 360 degree of this thing. And in particular, the rotation had to take, like I think 7.5 seconds and 24 frames per second. That's 180 pictures that I had to take of this. And then it all had to be done behind a green screen, so we could punch out the background afterwards. And anyway, this is the rig that I made. and it's nice. It's basically a bunch of scraps of wood that I found at my shop, and I just kind of glued and screwed them together, and you end up with whatever that is. And it was super wobbly. So every time we nudged it over to take a photo, the whole thing would just like kind of shake up and down for a couple minutes, and we had to wait for it to stop before we could take a photo. So it took a really long time. Oh yeah, that's our patio table. It was round. So anyway, hours later, take all these photos, and you end up putting them all together, and you get this. Yeah. And you can see the green screen is basically just dollar store, Dollarama Bristol board that wasn't big enough, so we just kind of patched together. After this, we ended up taking all this stuff into Photoshop and just kind of deleting out the green and cropping it and adjusting the colors and everything, and then you end up with this finished product, which is what our developers used in the game. And you apply a little bit of effects to it, and you get that beautiful end result. You can actually see that it's a little bit wobbly. Like I didn't realize it at the time, but it was sitting crooked on its little cradle. Actually, one thing. Let me go back. One thing about this rig is that the tower did not move. It stayed stationary, and the camera and the green screen moved around it. And that was so that the lighting on the tower wouldn't change. And because that would have been really weird if the shadows changed. So that was a kind of an interesting moving around the model instead of moving the model. I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but. So the tower was like fairly simple, I guess, in the end after figuring out how to do it and photographing it. But then the next thing was the blueprint. I should have turned the sound off for this actually, but let's go past it. This thing was super cheap and easy to make and photograph, and it's sitting right there. You can see it. And it's like a piece of construction paper from the Dollarama, and some foam core that's like crappily glued together, and I just tightly rolled up the two ends to make it look the way it did. And the glue gun was also from the Dollarama. And the whole thing is, yeah, I think it was a little bit more than $1. Anyway, this whole thing is like the really lo-fi way to do this kind of animation, and there it is. So where do I start? This kind of thing was well, I mean, you guys already tried to use the tutorial. It's for the shoot 'em up, and where you learn how to fly your plane and move around, and it didn't actually have to be an animation. It was just supposed to be like an open thing, but for some stupid reason, I was like, hey, Chad, I bet I can do this. And he said, yeah, do it. And shooting it took no time at all, which was kind of nice. The whole thing got set up outside in the sun, and that was too bright, so it got put in the shade, and did some adjusting. And then after that, Caitlin kind of stood over the bushes with two barbecue skewers and slowly squished it together, and then did the animation and stuck the skewers in the roll and then just pulled it apart. And I just rapidly took photos until you ended up with that. And then, we took all of our frames and we photoshopped out the sticks, and then you kind of end up with this nice little animation. So this is like a great example of making something with basically no money at all, like, and you know, just patience. Most of the time, I think, from the time it took to think of the idea and make it and photograph it was probably less than a day, and then it was like 3 days of Photoshop work and Premiere work trying to make it look good and work together, but. You know, you could do this at home, no problem. And so now the last thing I want to talk about is this guy, which was my favorite and most frustrating thing to work on. And it's the same kind of story as the tower. Chad comes up with this idea. And he says, "Can you do that?" And I have and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. So, you know, this is all the same steps as the tower. You know, he talks about, okay, I want to have this desert scene, and there's going to be like pyramids, like a casino style setup. And then Caitlin Russell comes along and draws some concepts. You can see hers on one side, and the stuff that she draws really sets the mood for it and helps me understand kind of what I'm going for. And then my drawing is more technical, and it's more nitpicky and like exactly how it's going to get laid out and maybe how am I going to shoot it. And that's kind of how I'm more focused on how am I going to build this, and that's kind of reflected in my sketches, and also, you know, it's kind of like the watercolor, except maybe a couple steps further. You don't want to waste a lot of time and money on just messing with something and not really knowing it's going to turn out and how it's going to work out. So you have to work it out really carefully. And let me see. And also, I am super anal attentive. The maze actually is a proper maze that you can solve. So if you guys come take a look at this thing, you can probably figure it out. So I took what I learned from the tower, and I made it in foam, and same stuff, same like cheap insulation foam. Marked it all off. And then just cut it really carefully with a knife. Now, the one thing I'm not good at is making nice, smooth shapes like the dunes. So I had this brilliant idea that I would kind of rough out the shapes and then just cover the whole thing in clay, and then just use that to get myself those nice smooth dunes and those nice flowing shapes. To just maybe distract away from my god-awful like hacking of the foam. And so I learned some valuable lessons about clay, which was that I don't know how to use it. And basically I worked on this thing and I like started to make all these dunes, and it was like, yeah, this thing looks great. And then the next morning, I wandered downstairs, and it just ate itself. The clay dried too fast, I think, and then it just lifted off the foam, because the foam doesn't expand or contract, really. And it just, the dunes were just coming off in sheets. So I had to throw that thing in the garbage. Yeah. So, you know, that's, if you don't know what you're doing, then that kind of happens. But I learned I learned some important things, and after that I thought maybe it's better for me to kind of take this on with my expertise and kind of draw on my particular experience. And I have a shop, and I was lucky enough to have access to a CNC machine, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it's this guy. This is not my machine, but this is just kind of like it's a computer-controlled robot. It just, you tell it what you want it to do. Well, it's not that simple, but you can use it to just really control what you're making. And before I could even get to this, I had to make a model, and that's this. And for anyone who's interested, this was done in ZBrush, which is actually a great program for just like really organically laying on, or really organically creating a model. You can paint on depth and paint in valleys, and you can get these wonderful organic shapes. And I had never used it before, so it was just kind of a learning process for me, and it wasn't too bad. After that, you have to take this model and you have to give the machine something that it can work with. And in this case, it's this. And it's kind of hard to see, but the white lines represent paths in space that the router is going to follow and cut through the material with. And this whole thing is just one line that just goes back and forth and traces over the material. And with that, you take, and with this thing, you take a block of foam and slap it on the machine, and it turns that, it cuts away at that, and it removes the bulk of the material. You can see, like, this is the roughing pass where it's taken away most of the stuff, and you end up with this. And after that, I'll change out the bit and put on a smaller bit, and then I get to run that really detailed pass. And there you can see it's halfway through the job, and it takes forever. And then this is the finished product off the machine. So after that, cut little pyramids by hand with little faces on them, and prime the whole thing. And for the sand, I wanted to actually put real sand on it, which is, it's covered. The whole thing is covered in real sand, and it was actually super simple. You just spray the whole thing with wood glue, and then you shake on sand, and you just keep on doing that until it's covered. And the reason why I decided I want to do that instead of just painting it a sand color is that when you rotate it around the model, I wanted to see those sparkles and that and see that texture. And it doesn't, most of it kind of disappears with the 1930s filter on the game, but you can kind of tell it's there. Really important thing, if you guys decide to make stuff out of foam like that and you want to spray paint it, spray paint melts foam. So it's really good for making moon craters, but usually it melts foam. So, after a couple coats of sand, you end up with this guy. And I don't think I could really ever pull that off with just paint. So I'm happy that I did it that way. And anyway, after that, you put in some fake palm trees, which are basically just carved up, I think, toothpicks. And after everything gets painted, and you end up with this guy, which I'm sure you've all seen. So shooting this model, I learned a lot from working on the tower, and this time around I decided that I was going to make a much better base, and so I designed something that would work a little bit better. The camera would move, and the screen behind it would move, and the screen is also way better. It's this nice curved backlit thing, and this time it's a blue screen because usually if you're going to set up a screen behind a model, it doesn't have to be green or blue. It's just best if it's a color that's not present in your model, because it's a lot easier to take away. So in this case, it's blue, and it made for some really nice mood lighting. Now, my first shots of this thing, I set this up in my kitchen. Were just threw everything together and just tested it, and took all kinds of different shots at different angles and different perspectives and fields of view, and then sent them all off to Chad. And so for him to approve, like and pick the one that he wanted. And so after I did this, I had moved the rig and I set it up in a more permanent place, so I could eat. And then I retook those shots just to make sure it was perfect, and sent them back to Chad. And he sends me back this message. He says, "You should have never shown us the originals, haha." And I couldn't for the life of me, because of the way it was lit in the kitchen with the sunlight, and I think it was like a cloudy day, and it was really wacky. It was kind of fluke lighting. I couldn't for the life of me recreate it. So after a whole lot of just messing around and setting up lights in the living room, I ended up with this monstrosity, which is, there's a bunch of other lights in here that you can't see, but just to try and replicate what he wanted, I even bought like a bunch of blue light bulbs so you could have that kind of blue wash from the sky. And so, it's kind of, anyway. Moving along, this thing had more frames because it was bigger than the tower. It had 360 frames, I think, because they also wanted like a slower rotation, and it also we did some tests and it was kind of weird. It was spun too fast, and I don't know if you guys saw this when you're looking at this, but the whole thing has 360 marks all around the underside of it. And they did this with the Oxbury camera as well. They made little marks and to know when they were going to move it and what frame they're on. So for this guy, I would just move the camera, nudge the camera over one step, take a photo, and then when I moved it over again, I would just cross out that mark so I know I took that photo. And that's kind of how that worked. And you put all this happened way faster than the tower because it wasn't wobbly, and we already had some experience behind it, and everything was kind of purpose-built. And when you put it all together, you end up with this, which I was pretty happy with. So, thank you. And that's where I'll end. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. And I guess at this point, we're going to do Q&A. That's great.
Thank you, Tina and Ali and Caitlin, for your awesomely detailed and informative presentations. And Ali is right. Now is time for your questions and answers. And you will get answers. But to lead the question and answer session, we have Sagan Yi, who's the Executive Director of Hand-Eye Society. Sagan is a 2D animator and occasional art game perpetrator, and she's worked on television and interactive projects for Disney and Adult Swim and the Cartoon Network. And says here you once spent 4 years making a fan animation of her favorite video game. So we figured she was the perfect person to start us off with some questions. So we're going to invite you two to come back up to the stage. We do have microphones for the questions in the audience, but because we're such a big group, I will run around with the mic. But if you can project your question, please do. And if you can't, maybe come down to the lower level, or we'll just work together and figure it out. So we're just going to get that set up. And we're going to maybe do about 15, 20 minutes, maybe 10. We're going to see how many questions you have. Okay.
Which one of these is mine?
This one's mine, that one's yours. So you guys can come back. You guys want to? Okay. All right, so Sagan, and get your questions going. All right.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
So it's a swell day for Q&A. That's my best impression of the announcer. So I actually volunteered to be the moderator because I had my own sort of questions. I'll just start with one because there's a lot of you and I want to make sure we get at least some of you in. But I sort of really wanted to ask you because, as was mentioned, I'm a 2D animator. I've done pretty involved like 2D character animation. I'm a self-taught programmer. I'm learning how to use Unity and like making my own games right now. So I know how difficult and tedious those processes are. And I've also played Cuphead. I haven't gotten very far, but I have played it. And I did some background reading into this project, and I was really interested in just how this whole thing kind of came together as a production, because you have these kind of like two what sounds like rather eccentric brothers who they've never made a game before, they have no background in game design, in programming, in art. I don't think one of them seems to be able to sketch a little bit, but the other maybe not so much. And they come from like I think a corporate banking world or something, and so they've decided to pull this team together from various cities and have them all work remotely. This had such potential to be a huge disaster. But I was talking with you a little bit before we started, and I'd like to just hear from you as artists what it was like to be picked, and then what it was like to work with the Moldenhauers.
So surprisingly, this was probably my favorite working experience ever. I don't know, I think it's because Chad and Jared are very mellow. They never get stressed out, even if there's so much pressure coming in from the outside to just deliver the game. It was a very like unicorn kind of a studio where everybody was really nice and everything went really well. There was no drama. It was very smooth. It just kind of progressively started getting more and more scope. So there was scope creep, definitely, but it didn't really upset anybody. I was just like, yay, more animations, you know? So I was happy. It was a great work experience, a great work environment, which is surprising because we're all working remotely on the internet, so.
I mean, like, can you repeat the question?
I guess, like, so I know, I think Tina said you were, Caitlin was the OCAD student. What were you doing, like, how did you get the call? How did you get invited, I guess, to participate in this project? And then, you know, as it went on, were you having any, I mean, you seemed like you were really involved and like super into everything that you were doing. So did you agree with Tina that it was just like a great, amazing experience to like work on a project that is this ambitious?
Yeah, it was an amazing experience because it was just, it was a whole bunch of people who, some of which who had never done some of the things they were doing before, so they just learned, everybody was winging it. And we all kind of knew each other, but we never met face to face, which is another neat little, kind of tidbit as far as Tina showed you about Basecamp. And what she didn't show you is like the giant meme and GIF battle that was happening. Like anytime someone sent something, they would just...
You need to have strong GIF skills.
Yeah. Yeah, and Chad and Jared's GIF skills were fantastic. I got onto this project mainly because I knew Kate, and at one point when they approached her initially to do that background for for the tutorial, I think there was some thought that it was going to be painted, and Chad asked her, "Can you photograph this? Can you make it look more like the Betty Boop like paper thing that was inspired by?" And she said, "Well, no, but I know a photographer. I know someone who can do it," and that was me. And that's kind of my introduction to Chad and Jared. And at that point, they were just like, "Wow, it's like that's magical. That's exactly what we wanted." So then they started harassing me for more stuff, and that's when the tower happened, and then you know, kind of ballooned from there.
Okay, so just one little point before I open it up to audience questions. Please keep it to actual questions, not comments or compliments. Those are great, but you can leave those for after the Q&A, or you can contact almost anyone here online. And yeah, I'm going to try and make this fun and entertaining as possible for everyone. Oh, and please keep it to like they're representing themselves as artists. So if you have questions like, is there going to be online multiplayer or something like that? they just cannot answer that right now. So I think I
Who is
saw...
first?
This-
You first?
Okay.
Okay. Oh,
What were the timelines like for the different projects? You both showed a number of different projects. I was wondering how long they took, both in like hours of work and then also time in total, like in your life. Was it weeks? Was it days?
does everyone hear that? It was a question around timelines for the production for each of their roles.
So, I mean, I guess it varies. This Genie model, failures included, I think ate up like maybe almost 6 months. But as far as actual working time, it probably wasn't that much. I think it was more like maybe about a month of actual work. And then there are other things like the book you see in the opening. That was just the like carving out that cover and making it the way it was, and just making the two pieces of the cover. I think was probably about 80 or so hours, and then learning how to bookbind and making and binding it together into a book was a little bit more time. And this doesn't account for designing it, and then Warren Clark drawing and like making the design for the cover and all that conceptualization. But I know on my end, a lot of the good results are the result of investing a lot of time, except for the blueprint. That was really quick.
So I'm considered to be one of the fastest animators on Cuphead, which is great because they gave me a lot of the characters just to get bulk out. You saw I animated over 60. I also got paid per drawing, and bills need to get paid. So I would churn out 200 drawings a week.
Thank you. Of course, thank you. All right, so this is a question more for Ali, although if Tina can weigh in, and if either you can speak for Chad. I'll be honest, when I saw this Genie board, I completely lost my mind, because this seemed like a direct reference to a very specific Fleischer cartoon. It was one of the Sinbad cartoons, and it actually featured a table with a camera that rotated around it, or the model rotated with models, much like that, called the rotograph. It is one of the most unbelievably deep cuts you can have in animation, and I'm getting to a question. Absolutely.
Question, please.
Absolutely. The question is, were you inspired by the rotograph, or did you just happen to independently recreate it?
So, working on this game, I actually had no idea that they did 3D backgrounds in 30s animation. I was introduced to this by Chad, because he would send all kinds of videos, and yeah, he sent the Sinbad one, and what was the other one? There was Sinbad, and then there was Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. And I remember watching that and seeing the panning shots where everything was like three-dimensional, and right away my brain just went to, oh, that's probably CG. No, wait, that's not possible. So no, I did not reinvent the rotograph, but I learned a lot about it, and I was really kind of excited to know that they did stuff like that, and I was mostly just asking myself why. Disney didn't do that stuff, and then, patents.
Too expensive also. They had to stop.
Yeah.
It was really expensive.
Yeah, so. Yeah.
Okay, let's try and give the other side. We'll take one from this side and then maybe one from up there. Someone's very excited. Oh, we have two very excited people. Jen, I'll let you pick.
Hi, I actually have a very similar question to his, because that immediately brought me back to that Popeye Sinbad cartoon, and I just wanted to ask you guys, knowing that there was a considerable amount of research, I'm guessing you guys had to see a lot of 1930s cartoons, Happy Harmonies, Silly Symphonies, Merry Melodies. Was there anyone in particular that really stood out or was very memorable or inspiring to you guys out of all the research that you guys did?
That's a hard question for me because I was completely immersed in the cartoons always. When I was doing concept art, I would actually play Betty Boop or Popeye in the background just to always kind of have that feel around me, and the music as well when I animated, just to get that kind of, that boppy feel. It's really hard to pick a favorite. I really liked some of the Betty Boop cartoons. There's a Snow White one with an evil queen that I really liked. There was one called Old Man and the Mountain, which was pretty amazing. It's also wonderful to see that they didn't have model sheets for some of these characters, and you could tell when a new animator takes on a new task because he completely changes. Like, he has a completely new face, and you're like, okay, well, that's what it is. And so I thought that was really great.
I think my favorite one is actually Sinbad. It was my favorite short that I never knew about until I was introduced to it, and that's kind of what helped me figure out how this was going to get stylized. And then there's also like a ton of research. They just bombarded us with like clip after clip of, oh, can you like take a look at this? Okay, and then okay, that's cool. And then maybe with a little bit of this one or a little bit of like, and there would be like 30 different cartoons that they would reference. Those guys just watched that shit nonstop, I think, as kids.
They were like unsung heroes experts of 1930s cartoons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, one from the balcony.
Can you project your voice? Yes, you with your hand up in the shirt, the plaid shirt. You, yes, beard, you. Yes, you.
Yeah, I'll try to project. I'm a game developer, so my question is that I noticed when you showed the background that changed after act showing. When I first played Cuphead, I was like, wow, it would be really expensive to playtest this game because any changes are going to be at the end of production. So were there other changes that needed to happen to things like color blindness or people not understanding the visuals in relation to the gameplay?
See, that is a more general gameplay question, so unfortunately I can't really answer that one. It would be a great question for Chad and Jared if they were here. So.
Did you get any calls for like, hey, we need you to reanimate this character?
Oh yes, well a lot of the stuff that would happen, and there's this one animation that's the bane of my existence. Like, I love all the characters except for one. I hate him. It's Mr. Chimes the monkey. And I remember my boyfriend was like, oh no, it's not the monkey again. I'm like, it's the monkey. Because that animation started as really simple. Like, he has to be closed, and it's a very mechanical rotation, which any animator here will know is absolute travesty. And then he had to have his little animation open, and that's all fine. But then there was like 75 other animations that got added onto my plate. Like, oh, he needs a transition from closed to open. And now he needs a transition from this to that, because like as they were testing it, they realized it just popped too much and they didn't like that, and it wasn't great on the eye for gameplay. So I would get requests like that to like add in transitions, and it was every time I thought he was dead. He just wasn't dead. And so that was really awful. But like, it happened quite a bit with other ones, but Mr. Chimes was the worst. Also, my favorite animation on Mr. Chimes was his death animation. It was wonderful.
I think for me, I didn't have quite a hardship Tina had. Mainly, it was kind of a logistical thing because we all worked at home. So in my case, my side of the job took up a lot of space. And once I set something up and lit it and shot it, I had to take it all down so I could actually live in my house again. So when Chad would come along and say, yeah, so can you like totally change the lighting on this or the angle or whatever, I'd be like, no. And then eventually I just have to set the whole thing up again and then reshoot it. So with this kind of thing, I learned very quickly to be careful about just doing a lot of tests and making sure that he was happy with the single images or like a bunch of basic images before I would commit and do the whole thing. So that was my.
Okay, we've heard a lot from the menfolk. So let's have the next one be a woman up there with a hat, a blue hat.
thing on? All right. So my question is it's pretty simple. What advice do you have for artists, and how do you stay motivated?
Especially on a project like this one.
I mean, you probably heard it 100 times before, but work on something that you're actually interested in working on. I know that, at least for Kate and I, we were kind of, we were of the mindset that even if this wasn't successful, we could still look back on it and be broke and be happy that we created this thing or helped create this thing. So I guess my bit of advice is don't do anything you don't want to do, even if you're getting paid a lot of money, because you're not going to look back at what you did and actually be proud of it.
So I have actually 10 years experience in the gaming industry, and I had a series of bad luck where a series of projects that I worked and put a lot of heart into never got published because there was some mess up with the client or some kind of legal war happened. So I think 3 years of my work never got seen by anybody, never got played by anybody, and that was really kind of depressing and brings you down when you're trying to do something that you love professionally. So my response to that was to always go back and work on your own personal projects, on things that make you happy. And one of the things that really makes me happy is animating on paper, on 2D. And one of the things that I kind of would whine about to my friends sometimes was like, oh, I love doing this, but nobody's ever going to pay me again to work on paper because everything is digital, everything is 3D. And I would just post my work on a blog and do what I loved in my spare time, which was never copious. I never had the time to do this, but I would find the time. And then Chad found my work on a blog because there are not many classical 2D animators who are young and looking for work. There's the James Baxters and the Glenn Keanes of the world, but they're masters and they're doing something else. So he found me through my blog and got me this job. And similarly to Ali, we did it for the love, not for the money. We were all kind of broke while doing this, but I was extremely aware as I was working on this project that this is probably the best project of my life. And I was so happy every day, and I was churning out 200 drawings and just really excited about the project I was on. And I feel that it was kind of this kind of moment in my career where I finally followed what I wanted to do, something that I was really passionate about. So even if it took 10 years to get here, well, actually 7, right? Because then I was working on Cuphead for a long time. But it takes time, and just persevere and keep following your dreams. Do your art on the side. Even if you have a well-paid job that you're doing things that you're not super excited about, do things that you're excited about in your own time.
Awesome. And your comment kind of reminds me of, who here is familiar with The Thief and the Cobbler? It's a Richard Williams thing. One of the most infamous unfinished films ever made, but just gorgeous 2D animation. And they interviewed an animator who worked on it, and it was like, do you regret spending 10 years on this and it never got finished? And they were like, we kind of knew that it was never going to get finished, but how often do you get to work on a project like this? So I'm not saying that's a great thing, but the amazing thing about Cuphead is it finished. Yeah.
We finished the game.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, up here on the balcony, you had your hand raised for a while.
Any of the bosses or characters that you worked on have any backstories or anything?
All the backstories. So I don't think I could go through them all, but I would name all of my characters. Some of them don't have official names, but for Sugarland Shimmy, I had little names and stories about their past. The waffle is Sir Woffington III. So I would make little stories in my head as I was animating them because it really helps me put character. Why are they angry? Why are they doing it? And none of these stories are official. They're just in my mind. But yes, there are some awesome backstories. I don't think I can officially share them because we're not part of the actual, I guess mythology of the game, but it really does help me, say, oh, he had 3 brothers, and, he was the youngest, and whatever. It's all in my head, and it's happening as I'm animating.
The carrot, the potato, and the onion are all related.
Pip and Dot were a couple, and she's definitely the pants in the relationship, even though she wears a skirt.